will be 5 minutes or less. I know your time is valuable, so I'll aim to quickly tell you what you need to know so that you can immediately apply it to your work or life. The lectures in this course will also be standalone. That means you don't have to watch in any particular order. If you're searching for a particular skill or topic that's relevant for you, take a look through the available tips to find the knowledge you need when you need it. I'm thrilled you've taken the first step to expand your communication skills. Jump in now to find the smart tips that work for you. In more than 2 decades as a presentation and communication skills coach and instructor, I've worked with hundreds of leaders from around the world who wrestle with filler words. Whether it's like, or you know, no matter what language you speak, chances are you've developed a habit where you're unconsciously creating a sound bridge between ideas so that you don't lose your train of thought. And that habit is making you sound less polished, poised, and professional than you want. Luckily, my fix is relatively simple. Here's a 4-week plan to get those pesky words out of your speeches and conversations for good. Week 1, find a partner to help increase your awareness. Chances are you're not aware of how often where you're unconsciously creating a sound bridge between ideas so that you don't lose your train of thought. And that habit is making you sound less polished, poised, and professional than you want. Luckily, my fix is relatively simple. Here's a 4-week plan to get those pesky words out of your speeches and conversations for good. Week 1, find a partner to help increase your awareness. Chances are you're not aware of how often you're saying like, or you know, because it's happening unconsciously. Find someone at work and perhaps somebody at home whom you can ask to point out every single time you use a filler word. Record it yourself and listen to it, tallying up how frequently you use those words. The goal isn't to embarrass you, it's to help you hear what you're not yet hearing on your own. Week 2, catch yourself as you say it. The goal of week 2 is for you to hear yourself say or so without anybody pointing it out to you. This is the week where you say to yourself, I just said and I just said it again, and feel really frustrated that you don't have it handled. That's exactly where you should be at this point, consciously aware of how often it's happening and really ready for a change. Week 3, replace the bad habit with a helpful one. After a week of hearing yourself use these filler words, you're ready to stop yourself in your or right tracks and replace the sound with silence. The moment you hear or even feel yourself start to use a filler word, stop. Don't say another word or sound. Pause. Just pause. Your audience and your future professional self will thank you for it. Week 4, keep practicing. While week 3 will feel like a start, stop, start process, week 4 will begin to feel a little more natural, and you'll want proof that you've improved. If you haven't burnt out your week 1 partner, ask her for some feedback comparing your speaking fluency to how you sounded 3 weeks ago. Record yourself and listen to it again, comparing tallies from week 1. Celebrate your improvement, but be mindful of how easy it is to revert back if you don't stay on top of it. And if you need more improvement, go back to week 1 or 2. What's the best way to know that you've gotten this handled? When somebody comes up to you and asks how you learned to become such a great public speaker. Every presentation is an opportunity to make an impression. You can either use your pitch to build credibility, engagement, and buy-in, or blow the chance to share your story in a way that sells. No matter how compelling your message is, if you don't capture your audience's attention in the first minute, you'll miss the momentum you need to get them on board and to stay there. That first minute is when you're supposed to establish your command of the room and the topic, build rapport, and signal that you're calm so the audience can just relax. You've got this. But this rarely happens. Here are the presentation openers I hear over and over again. Hello, thanks for being here. Hi there, thanks for bearing with me today. Let me start by apologizing for... No. A presentation opening is your promise to your listeners. These starters promise that this meeting is going to be boring at best and a mess at most. A great introduction promises the audience that this presentation will be engaging, innovative, educational, and if you're lucky, maybe even inspiring. To do that, you need to stop being so polite and start being more passionate from the moment you open your mouth. While it's tempting to put weeks into building a captivating deck, spend days making sure all the numbers add up, and wake up at night worrying about whether you've incorporated all the latest changes from your team, you are better off spending a few of those minutes making sure that your start is as strong, solid, and sizzling as the rest of your presentation. Here are 10 speech openings to get you started. 1. When I showed up for my first day of work here, I mistakenly thought that... 2. 5, 10, 20 years ago, I never could have imagined that. 3. The year was... 4. I will never forget the first time that... 5. What would you do if you'd been in my shoes? So here's what happened. 6. I have a confession to make. 7. I was brought up to believe. 8. Among my friends, I am famous for... 9. I don't like to admit it, but 10. Something you'd never guess about me is... One of my favorite sayings is, start as you mean to go on. In other words, if you start powerfully, you'll go on to make a powerful impact. If you've ever wondered, how can I organize my ideas quickly, or how can I think on my feet more effectively, then you need a tried and true formula for communication success. The PREP method. P, point of view. Share your perspective. Make it clear, concise, and convincing. Keep your point to 1 sentence or 2 at most. Here's an example. Coaching is a worthwhile investment for managers. R, reason. Justify your point of view. 1 robust reason is excellent, 2 solid reasons are good, and 3 are the maximum. After that, you start to lose your listener, your ground, and your train of thought. For example, coaching is a worthwhile investment for managers. The reasons are that a coach offers them an objective perspective, a resource for ongoing skill development, and helps hold them accountable. E, example or evidence or experience. Back up your point. Bring it to life and bring your life to it. If you're someone who typically cites evidence, try sharing your personal experience. If you tend to use your personal experience to make your case, offer a client example. Mix it up. Here's an example. When I first became a manager, I wasn't sure how to effectively make the transition from peer to boss. Luckily, I began working with a coach who helped me objectively identify what the obstacles were to making a smooth transition and what opportunities I needed to take advantage of to establish myself in my new role. P, point of view revisited. Restate your point of view. This is your opportunity to end succinctly and with finality. For example, and that's why I believe that coaching is a worthwhile investment for managers. No matter what you're talking about, following the PREP, P-R-E-P method can help you prepare for conversations when you don't have time to prepare. Mark Twain once said, there are 2 kinds of speakers, those that are nervous and those that are liars. In other words, no matter how seasoned you are when it comes to making presentations, there is going to be some particular audience, some particular topic, some particularly poor timing, or something else in particular that is going to give you some sleepless nights and a queasy stomach in the morning. It doesn't matter if you're presenting to 2 people or to 2,000 people. When presentation anxiety strikes, you need some strategies to get out of your own head and onto the stage with confidence, polish, and professionalism. Here are 3 strategies for managing your anxiety when it's time for you to take the stage. 1, exercise that morning. For people who consider public speaking a stressful activity, you're in luck. According to Michael Hopkins, a graduate student at Dartmouth's Neurobiology of Learning and Memory Laboratory, the positive stress of exercise prepares cells and structures and pathways within the brain so they're more equipped to handle stress in other forms. Rather than use the morning of your big presentation to ruminate and freak yourself out, spend at least a half hour working out. Whether you go for a brisk walk or do CrossFit or take a yoga class, the release of serotonin, also known as the happy hormone, that results from this exercise will flood you with positive feelings for your presentation. 2, memorize your first 3 lines. The hardest part for most public speakers is actually getting started. You're now trying to manage your anticipatory anxiety, planning what could go wrong in the future, with your situational anxiety, experiencing what may be going wrong right now. Short circuit your monkey mind by memorizing the first 3 lines of your presentation. This will shift your brain out of panic mode and into memory retrieval mode. And so that you don't add memory anxiety to your list of concerns, make sure that you have practiced saying your first 3 lines out loud several times. 3, be bold. This may sound counterintuitive, but if your hands are shaking, lead off with big, bold hand gestures rather than trying to hide your hands. The more energetic your gestures are, the less anyone will notice your subtle shaking. Make the movement work for you rather than against you by bringing positive attention to your dynamic body language. What doesn't work? Holding a cup of coffee, a pen, a remote slide advancer, a sheet of paper, or anything else that will be shaking in addition to your hands. You may not love to speak in public, but at the very least, you will survive it. When it comes to public speaking, there is plenty of advice that focuses on the importance of mindset, especially when it comes to managing the anxiety that can result in sweating, shaking, stomach pain, a blank mind, and much more. I'm all for it. I truly believe in the power of positive visualization, the perks of mental rehearsal, the dividends of focusing on past successes, and many other mindset strategies. These frequently work for me and for my clients to reduce anxiety and its visual and audible symptoms, except when they don't. And when they don't, we could all benefit from some quick, simple, and practical strategies to mask what mindset couldn't solve this time. Here are 3 tips to address some of the most common signs of public speaking stress, at least until your mindset catches up. 1, sweating. Keep some paper towel or even a small hand towel available to blot your hands or forehead before you get up to speak where nobody can see. Don't use tissues or toilet paper. Every presentation is an opportunity to make an small paper blobs that will attach themselves to your skin. Try to avoid wiping your palms on your clothes, which can leave a wet stain. If you need to, use clinical strength antiperspirant and deodorant. Wear dark shirts or dresses, and keep an extra layer handy in case you need to cover it up. 2, stomach pain or noise. If you know that you run the risk of this symptom, take preventative measures. Treat this the way you would a bout with a bug. Stick to bland foods before you present. So choose dry toast over a croissant, tea over coffee, bananas over citrus. Cut out dairy, fried or acidic foods, or any other foods or beverages you know you might react poorly to beginning 12 to 24 hours before your presentation. And if you can't prevent your stomach from making strange sounds, do 2 things. First, ask somebody you trust whether it's audible from where the audience is sitting. If not, don't worry about it. If it is, don't try to hide it. Address it head on in your presentation by saying something like, "Clearly, my presentation is all that's standing between us and lunch, so let's get the show on the road." Your audience will likely laugh, and you'll feel more relaxed knowing that you don't have to hide it. 3, blank mind or fumbling for words. One might think that the best strategy for this is to memorize your whole presentation, but one would be wrong. Memorizing your entire presentation just increases the anxiety about and risk of forgetting the whole thing. Make sure to have your first 3 lines completely memorized to get you into the presentation. You might also have some notes with your key points in bullets, not full sentences, some transitional phrases, and any critical words, taglines, or other language you absolutely positively have to make sure you say. For most people, the security of knowing that the critical points are written down and within easy access can be enough to reduce this symptom. As American artist and writer Walter Anderson noted, nothing diminishes anxiety faster than action. You may not be able to eliminate your public speaking fears, but you can take action to keep them from getting in the way of a polished, professional presentation. As much as we want positive feedback from our bosses, believe it or not, we also want negative feedback from our managers in order to improve in our jobs, grow in our careers, and achieve better business results. However, for many of us, whether you're pitching a potential funder, lobbying your boss, or delivering a conference keynote, you need to find a way to cut through your audience's distractions to make sure your message registers. What distractions? The emails buzzing in their pocket or on the desk right in front of them, the tough feedback they just got from their boss, the sight of a birthday cake in the conference room. No matter how topical, relevant, or pressing your content is, you're often fighting an uphill battle for the audience's attention. Now, of course, you can make yourself memorable by perfectly executing a magic trick, blasting your walk-on song, mine is Kelly Clarkson's Miss Independent, or flashing the lights for a strobe-like effect. You could, but you don't have to. You can get your listeners' attention by thoughtfully, strategically, and sparingly using some key phrases that show you're paying attention to them, their strengths, their concerns, and their priorities. What do all of these have in common? The word you. You cuts through the clutter of internal and external noise to pull your audience's attention back to what they often care about most: themselves, their priorities, and their impact. Think about it. When you hear the word you, who do you think about first? You. And chances are you are one of your favorite people to think about. Here are 12 phrases that will catch your listeners' ears and keep their attention long enough for you to share your key message in a way that educates, illuminates, and inspires action. Appreciation. One thing that you've taught me is, or one thing that I've learned from you is. One thing that I appreciate about you or your company is, you know better than most people or most companies that. Scarcity. I'm going to let you in on a secret. You may already know this, but just in case you don't, because time is tight, you may want to consider bottom lining. Here's what's most important about this for you. Why you need to know this is, let me bottom line this for you. Call to action. You may want to write this next part down. If you're only going to remember one thing, it should be, if you're only going to do one thing, it should be, making a presentation to any audience can feel intimidating. Making one to a distracted audience can feel overwhelming. With these handy phrases, you now know how you can make yourself and your message memorable. When people think of public speaking mistakes, they usually imagine disaster scenarios. Their minds go blank in front of the boss, or the AV equipment stops working, or the client asks them a question that totally stumps them. And of course, these things can happen. Nevertheless, the 3 most common public speaking mistakes that I see among the people I coach have nothing to do with them not knowing their content or not being able to project their deck. They aren't emergencies or catastrophes. They are ways of approaching a presentation that dramatically limit the speaker's ability to make it relevant, engage the audience, and build a trusting relationship. Here are 3 critical shifts in your thinking that will take your public speaking from good to great. 1, the presentation is about your audience, not about you. An effective presentation isn't one where you cram in all of the information you know on a particular topic. An effective presentation is one where you've identified the following. What's keeping your audience up at night, such as making money, saving time, looking good in front of their boss, etc. What gets them out of bed in the morning, such as beating the competition, developing the next generation of leaders, discovering new markets. How to connect the content you deliver to either or both of those lists. Number 2, you are the presentation, not your deck. Your PowerPoint, keynote, or video reel is the support for your presentation. It provides visual and auditory reinforcement to help your listeners focus on and recall key concepts. But it is not the presentation. It is up to you to bring your message to life using stories, analogies, metaphors, data, statistics, client examples, as well as vocal variety, gestures, facial expressions, movement throughout the room, and more. A deck is one-dimensional, and it is up to you to make it dynamic and inviting. Number 3, your presentation is a dialogue, not a monologue. Turning your monologue into a dialogue doesn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as taking a poll. By a show of hands, how many of you check Twitter daily? Asking for some real-time feedback. What's still unclear about our next steps for marketing in the 4th quarter? Or taking questions throughout the presentation rather than waiting for formal Q&A. Feel free to ask questions anytime throughout the presentation. Your audience has something to say, whether you give them the opportunity to say it or not. Invite them in rather than silence them out. Your presentation doesn't have to be perfect, but what it does have to do is showcase what works best. Storytelling is a powerful communication tool. It's a way to build a memorable brand, create customer engagement, and sell products and services. Storytelling is considered sticky in a good way. Stories are stickier than presenting data alone because they engage the motor and sensory region of the cerebral cortex. This means when somebody listens to a story, they not only hear it, they see it and feel it. Paul Zak, the founding director of the Center of Neuroeconomic Studies at the Claremont Graduate University, wrote, "Narratives that cause us to pay attention and also involve us emotionally are the stories that move us to action." And because stories are so potent in moving people to action, as a sales tool, an engagement strategy, a marketing tactic, they have become ubiquitous. To cut through the clutter, you don't need to run out and hire a chief storytelling officer, employ a cutting-edge videographer, or throw out your whole website. What you do need to do is to understand 3 common cognitive biases, mental shortcuts, that your listeners likely have, and craft your stories in a way that takes advantage of the way they're already thinking. 1, familiarity principle. We tend to prefer things that we're familiar with. Studies have shown that people even demonstrate a preference for products that share the same letter of their first name. To take advantage of this, your story should repeat keywords and themes frequently. Make references and analogies to products and services that the listener already knows, likes, and uses. Use a client example who share common characteristics with your audience. Yes, maybe even using the same first name. 2, knee-jerk bias. We want to make fast decisions and take immediate actions. In economics, this is known as hyperbolic discounting, where, given 2 similar rewards, people show a preference for the one that will come sooner and sometimes smaller rather than later and bigger. To leverage this, your story should help your listener understand how they can get involved immediately, offer both short-term and long-term options for getting involved that aren't mutually exclusive, provide simple strategies for buying or buying in rather than complex, ambiguous, or time-sucking ways. Show your listeners how investing in your product or service is a natural extension of what they're already doing. 3, self-serving bias. We want to maintain and enhance our own self-esteem. We also tend to see ourselves as more competent and altruistic than we really are. To tap into this, your story should make your listener feel important. Show them how investing in your product or service would make them feel happy and proud. Highlight why this is a smart decision. Rely on words like you, us, and we to make them feel like they're part of an exclusive in-group. When it comes to telling a story, less is more. The less work you give your listeners to do in processing the information, the more work will come your company's way. Memorizing your entire presentation is a recipe for disaster. No matter how well you think you have it down, the anxiety about forgetting a part will likely mitigate any benefit you might get from memorizing. I think about memorizing a whole presentation like a house of cards. All you need is for one part to weaken and the entire thing collapses. That's not to say you shouldn't memorize any of it. So what should you commit to memory? Your opening 3 lines and your closing 3 lines. You want to know how to start and how to end without ever having to think about it. What works about this strategy? 1, it shifts your brain out of anticipatory anxiety mode. I'm gonna die up there, or I would actually welcome the sweet release of death, into brief memory retrieval mode. What's my first sentence? And once you get those 3 sentences out of your mouth, you're already in the presentation itself. It's happening. 2, if you get off track during your presentation, knowing how you're supposed to wrap it up can help reorient you. 3, if you have to suddenly shorten the amount of time you have to speak, you already know how to start and how to end. You're now just figuring out what to cut in the middle. You don't want to sound scripted, you want to sound sincere. So bring some note cards, a sheet of bullets, or something that can prompt you about your key points. And make sure you take time to practice your presentation. That will be the best way to commit your content to memory. Leave the memorization for the multiplication tables. One of my favorite cartoons shows a speaker at a podium with the caption, "I will now fend off questions from the audience." Why does that make me smile? Because most of us, when making a presentation, regard the Q&A portion as a combat zone. We just want to make our presentation and get the heck out of there without pesky inquiries that threaten to show the holes in our logic, the gaps in our preparation, or the spaces between our areas of expertise. To master this part of the presentation with more confidence and competence, there are 8 questions that you can and need to ask yourself in advance. 1, what is most important and relevant about my topic for this audience? In other words, you want to think about the WIFM, what's in it for me, for this audience, and make sure to address it throughout. 2, how does what I'm proposing fit into the bigger picture? Your listeners have their own priorities and obligations, so let them know how what you're pitching plays well with their goals, projects, and plans. 3, how easy can I make this for them? You may think that the idea you're plugging is a no-brainer. Great. Make sure you are very clear in demonstrating the feasibility of turning your idea into action. 4, what's this going to cost? Show them the money, but also remember that costs extend beyond dollars and cents. Be clear and upfront about the costs of personnel, energy, time, and other valuable resources, and include your perspective on what makes this worth it or not, if that's your angle. 5, when will all of this happen? Timing is everything. Share as much as you can about when the proposed project will start, will end, and milestones along the way. 6, who's in charge? If you're making the presentation, there's often an assumption that you're the one carrying out the work. If that's so, make the case for why you have the competence and credibility to do so. And if it's not you, let the listeners know who is doing what and why that team is the A team. 7, what's my stake in this? Sure, we all have to make presentations from time to time where we're not really feeling it. But the more you can let your audience not just know how much you know, but how much you care, what your stake is, and your unique perspective on it, the greater credibility you bring to the presentation. 8, how can I view Q&A as something positive? Call me crazy, but I look forward to the audience's questions because I believe that their inquiries build trust with me, especially when I handle them well, can focus their thinking and mine, guide a rich discussion, lead to better answers than I may have come up with myself, and contribute to shared ownership of the topic or project we're discussing. There's no question that Q&A can be intimidating, but with a few shifts in skill set and mindset, you can use questions to increase your credibility. Every presentation is an opportunity to demonstrate your confidence, competence, and character. You have the chance to prove that you understand your audience's concerns and show how you can meet their needs. And when you do it well, you also get to boost your personal and professional credibility. Until you say, I'm sorry. Saying I'm sorry in a presentation is like shining a giant spotlight on something you don't want the audience to see. Saying I'm sorry in a presentation is like blasting the volume on something you don't want your listeners to hear. What's the impact? It makes you sound insecure and unprepared. It also puts others in the position of having to reassure you that whatever you're apologizing for isn't a big deal. And you don't want your audience to be focused on tending to your needs. It's your job to focus on tending to theirs. Here are 3 things that presenters often apologize for and what to do instead. 1, I'm sorry, but I'm so nervous. Being nervous for a big presentation is a given. If you have something at stake, like a business outcome, a relationship, or your reputation, you're gonna feel it. And here's what I can tell you from decades of experience helping people become better presenters. More often than not, your anxiety is barely visible to the audience until you say, I'm sorry, but I'm really nervous. Your shaking hands or fluttering voice might encompass all of your attention, but your audience is likely thinking about how they look and sound, as well as what they need to do after this meeting, more than they're thinking about you. And if you've gotten feedback that your anxiety is evident to others, plan to take a break early in your presentation, perhaps asking people to introduce themselves or for you to distribute materials where you can take a breath and regroup. Number 2, I'm sorry, it looks like the technology isn't working. Again, give me just a minute here. As somebody who has presented in 2 separate blackouts, one where even the toilets didn't flush, I can tell you that there is no substitute for 3 things. First, doing a test run with the technology right before the presentation. Second, identifying in advance who your emergency tech guru will be on site. And third, having a power-free plan B. If the technology isn't cooperating, even after a successful tech rehearsal, spend no more than 5 minutes trying to get it going, and tell your audience that as well. At that point, implement plan B. If it's a PowerPoint presentation, then come prepared with backup copies available for everyone to refer to. Or if you really know your stuff, as you should, skip the slides altogether. If it's a webinar, you may need to cancel and reschedule, which is better than having everybody hang on for 10 or 15 minutes while you desperately try to work out the glitches. One caution, whatever you do, don't throw your technology team under the bus. It may feel good to let off a little frustration in the moment, and you might get a laugh, but it will be at the expense of the people who are trying hard to get this right, and whose help you will need again. 3, I'm sorry, but I don't know the answer to that question. Leave off the apology and get down to business. If it's a question you should know the answer to, say, I should know that offhand, and I can't recall it at the moment. I'll get back to you with that information by the end of business today. If it's a question that somebody else might know, offer it up to others. I don't know that, but I'm wondering if somebody else here does. And if you just don't know, say so. I don't know, and I'll find out and get back to you. So when should you apologize? When you've said something that hurt or insulted somebody or a group of people in the room, whether or not you meant it and whether or not you see it their way. I once watched a speaker address a woman who was making some noises by asking her in front of several hundred people, "Are you deliberately trying to distract me?" She then explained that she had Tourette's syndrome and that her noises were involuntary. The speaker was embarrassed and apologized to her and to the entire audience. Without that apology, his credibility, and likability for that matter, would have suffered a fatal blow. Save "I'm sorry" for if and when you've done something that absolutely requires an apology, and use your confidence, flexibility, and resilience for everything else. The whole presentation is an hour, but I'm only really on for 10 minutes. I only have to know my part. The other folks know the rest of it. Which one of us is taking questions? We'll figure it out, keep it loose. You might think that having 2 or 3 other colleagues to co-lead your presentation, pitch, or proposal with can cut the preparation and practice time down significantly for each of you. You might feel a sense of relief that others can swoop in and rescue you if you get sick, sweaty, or stuck. You might believe that the less speaking time you have, the less responsibility you hold for your overall success. Yes, you might feel all of that, but unless you have planned, prepared, and practiced as a team, you would be wrong. Whether you're making a VC pitch, sharing your recommendations with the board, or selling your newest products or services to a customer, presenting as a team can be significantly more difficult to sound coordinated, concise, and cohesive than going it alone. But it doesn't have to be. A team presentation can look and sound highly professional and polished. Furthermore, it can serve as a model for the level of coordination, collaboration, and teamwork that you want your prospects and clients to associate with you and your company. How does that happen? By sitting down with your team to ask and answer these 20 questions before anybody picks up a pen, a mouse, or a microphone. 1. Who is accountable for this presentation overall? The person who gets to make the final decisions and have veto power. 2. Who is responsible for which part in terms of content versus design? 3. Who will knit the parts of the presentation together so it looks and sounds like a consistent and cohesive whole? 4. Who do we need to work with outside of this group to give us objective insight and feedback? 5. When is each part due and who will keep us on schedule? 6. When will we practice delivering as a team and how much time will we need for that? 7. Who's in charge of checking the AV before we present? Who's in charge of running it as we present? 8. How will each presenter be introduced to the audience on the day of the presentation? 9. Where should the team members stand while others are presenting? 10. What should non-speaking team members be doing or not doing when they're not on? 11. How will we keep track of our time in each section, for each speaker, and overall during the presentation? 12. Who is taking the notes, writing flip charts, and distributing materials? 13. Do we want to share one microphone, or do we each need one, and what kind? 14. What do we do if somebody on the team says something incorrect or inaccurate? 15. What do we do if a member of the team chokes or isn't at his or her best? 16. Who will be watching the audience for clues and cues, and how will we communicate our reading of the room to the rest of the team during the presentation? 17. How will we transition from one speaker to the next, and what will we say to hand it over to the next person? 18. How will we divide up the Q&A? 19. Who is the point person on our team for any follow-up needed? 20. How can we support our weakest link and showcase our strongest player? Presenting well, cohesively as a team is the best way to show your client or prospect that you are the team they want to hire. Franklin D. Roosevelt's advice on the topic of public speaking gets it right. Be sincere, be brief, be seated. Or shall I say, I think he gets it 75% right. I would add one more suggestion. Be quiet. Ironic, isn't it? But if you want to be a more commanding presenter, stop talking. Why? Because a pause is a gift to you and to your audience. Most of us know that pausing is key to building suspense, telling a joke successfully, and conveying confidence. Here are 5 more reasons why you should pause more in your next presentation. 1, to breathe. If you're like many presenters, you get nervous, especially at the beginning of your talk. You might find yourself speaking faster and faster out of stress and forgetting to breathe. If this sounds like you, plan to memorize your introduction, deliver it, and then take a pause to breathe before you go into your agenda of what you're going to cover. 2, to reduce filler words. Filler words are a replacement for pauses, a replacement that undermines your professionalism. Replace these words like like, with silence, and you'll immediately sound more confident. 3, to make a transition. You don't want your presentation to feel like one long run-on sentence. Use a pause to signal to the audience that you've concluded one part and that you're moving on to the next part. This can be for a content transition from point A to point B, a structural transition from the introduction to the agenda, or a tone transition from the bad news to the good news. 4, to give the audience time to process. According to researchers at the University of Minnesota, many of us listen to the content while simultaneously evaluating the content and looking for confirmation that the content proves us right. Both of those get in the way of your audience comprehending the content. Pause so that your listeners can think about what you're saying. 5, to check for confusion. Say, let me pause for a moment here and see what questions you have before I move on. And then be silent. Maybe even for longer than feels comfortable for you or your audience. But if you don't give them the opportunity to ask, they may be confused or concerned throughout the entire presentation and never say anything about it. Pausing can be a powerful tool to take your presentations from good to great. In the words of Mark Twain, the right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. You have a big presentation to make to your client, your funders, or your boss. You've spent hours developing a deck that's concise, crisp, and visually stunning. You've practiced the delivery so that you can speak with clarity, calm, and confidence. You've tested to make sure your technology is glitch-free. You've proofread the printed materials and developed an opening statement that's sure to capture the hearts and minds of your listeners. You got this. Until the end. If you're planning to wrap up your presentation with a half-hearted call for any questions, followed by a quick thank you and an exit, then you haven't planned your whole presentation. In fact, you're missing out on a critical opportunity to reinforce your key message, offer a final appeal to gatekeepers or decision makers, and make yourself and your whole pitch more memorable. Too many people end their presentations with a call for questions, which is a mistake. Why? Because it leaves the audience in charge of your ending when in fact you want to be the one who decides what the last words are that the audience hears. So you may be asking yourself, if I don't end with the Q&A, how do I end? Great question. If you're not planning to take questions throughout the presentation, here are the final 4 steps you need to end your presentation memorably in a good way. 1, recap your main points. After you've covered your content, sum it up for the audience so that they can remember what you've just told them. No matter how compelling you were, you still need to assume that people's attention spans are short. A quick review of your main points will help your listeners lock in what they've learned. 2, invite questions and mean it. While you may wish you could avoid this section at all costs, you need to give people an opportunity to clarify anything they didn't understand, seek additional information, and even challenge your proposal. You might even find that an audience member's question brings up a novel idea or a thoughtful approach you hadn't considered, leading you to draw an updated conclusion. 3, share your conclusion. Don't get complex or fancy. It can be a simple restatement of your objective with a few observations thrown in that you collected during the Q&A. Or if the Q&A didn't yield any new insights, skip those observations. The point is to remind your audience of the key message you want to reinforce. 4, close memorably and meaningfully. Perhaps no section of a presentation is as important as the closing, since that's the last thing your audience will hear. And because it's so critical, your closing must be prepared and practiced. What are you preparing and practicing? A powerful quotation from a business leader, a relevant song lyric, a movie line, a rousing call to action, a concise story, a rhetorical question, or, for bonus points, a link back to your opening statement. You never get a second chance to make a last and lasting impression. Make sure that your presentations end positively, memorably, and with you in the driver's seat. Even under the best of circumstances, it can be intimidating to make a presentation. Public speaking is a major source of anxiety for many professionals whose worries may range from feeling underprepared, anticipating difficult questions, or assuming that the technology will have some or many glitches. And that's on a good day. A bad day for many of us is when some or all of the above happens and your boss is in the audience. It makes sense to feel concerned. Whether you have a terrific relationship with your boss, a terrible one, or something in between, a power differential exists. According to research in organizational behavior, power refers to asymmetric control over valued resources. Going into a presentation, already a high-pressure situation, knowing that one person in the room can restrict or release your access to valued resources like money, time, staffing, or career advancement can significantly hike up your stress level. Here are 3 strategies for delivering a confident, competent presentation without getting rattled by your boss. 1, ask yourself, what keeps my boss up at night, and address it. It could be meeting next quarter sales goals, implementing a potentially divisive change campaign, or even making her own boss look good. When possible, acknowledge that her pain point is your pain point and show how your presentation addresses it. This demonstrates empathy and shows that you're thinking like a boss. 2, know the weakest part of your presentation and fix it in advance. Inevitably, there will be 1 or 2 parts of your presentation you're hoping your boss won't notice because the data is mixed, or the timing is questionable, or the feasibility is to be determined. Assume she will notice. Put extra time into working to make your weakest link stronger, and also be prepared to address it head on if and when your boss calls you on it. Whatever you do, don't fudge your answer. Tell the truth, and then communicate your concrete, timely plan for improvement. 3, make your colleagues look good. You might be tempted to use this presentation as a way to show off how smart you are. Don't do it. All you need is for one person in the room to ask you a question you don't have the answer to, or to challenge your data or offer information you weren't privy to, and you will have undermined your mission and embarrassed yourself. At the beginning of your presentation, make sure to acknowledge your colleagues' expertise and contributions, and set the expectation that there are others in the meeting who may be able to share their insights and experiences. And then invite them to do so. You'll look like a team player to your boss, and you'll have given your coworkers an opportunity to shine too. Answering questions builds credibility, engagement, and connection, and you need to know how to handle them well. Here are some tips for handling questions that are informational, such as, when is the plant inspection scheduled for? Or how many salespeople will you be training in Q3? Or speculative questions like, how do you think that your technology will change over the next 10 years? Or what new regulations are likely to impact our industry in the coming months? 1. Once you've heard the question, paraphrase it for the rest of the audience. A paraphrase has several benefits. It ensures that all the members of the audience actually hear the question. This is particularly important if the questioner is in the front row. It allows you to confirm that you understood the question. The questioner should indicate yes or no after you paraphrase. It may diffuse any hostility the questioner might have towards you, since you'll both have to agree that at the very least you understand the question. It also buys you some time while you try to figure out an answer. 2. Align your answer with the kind of question being asked. If the question is informational, provide the information. And what if you don't know the answer to the question? It's all right to say, I don't know. You can then assure the questioner that you'll follow up and get back to them with a response as soon as possible. Then quickly steer the focus back to a point you do know. 3. If the question calls for you to speculate, don't guess, reframe, or abstain. You should acknowledge aloud that you've been asked to speculate. That sounds like you're asking me to speculate on where the industry is heading. Is that right? And that you know you are doing so based on your analysis of the past and the present, not knowledge of the future. While none of us can know the future for sure, based on past and current trends, I might speculate that. If you can't reasonably speculate, or you feel like the risk of getting it wrong is too high or could cause too much damage down the road, abstain from speculating. Use the opportunity to reinforce a key point or message. You might say, I can't speculate on where the industry is heading, but what I can tell you is that we have a tremendous opportunity right now to shape the future direction. And as I mentioned in my presentation, reinforce key message. Don't miss an opportunity to show what you know, invite other perspectives, and truly engage the audience by mastering the Q&A. Making a presentation under the best of circumstances can be nerve-wracking. And what can make a presentation even more unnerving? Fielding hostile questions from the audience. These aren't innocent informational queries like, which agency are we going with for our next campaign? Nor are they speculative requests such as, who do you think will be our biggest competition in the next 3 years? These are the thinly veiled challenges to your credibility, knowledge, and integrity that can cause even the most seasoned presenter to sweat. So what should you do if you get a hostile question? Don't take the bait and don't get defensive. And don't become hostile yourself. You want to make sure that a hostile questioner doesn't get the attention, focus, or compassion of the audience. You also want to make sure that a hostile questioner doesn't sway the audience or undermine your authority or confidence. Here are 3 techniques you can try. 1. Acknowledge the reason behind the emotion, but not the emotion itself. Imagine being asked this question: why doesn't senior management seem to care about our cost of living increases? Don't say, wow, you sound furious, unless you want to risk the questioner responding, you bet I'm furious, and you want to know why? Because you people never, and then taking over the whole presentation. You might try saying, it sounds like your cost of living increases are critically important to you and your colleagues. Let me stress how critically important they are to us too. We agree on that. With that shared objective, I'd like to address how we're planning to handle this. 2. Offer the questioner the floor temporarily. If you recognize that the audience member is using the question really to make a statement, notice it out loud. It sounds more like you have a point of view to share than a question. Is that right? If so, please share your perspective with us. I'm sure others would like to hear it as well. This may reduce his or her feelings of frustration at not feeling heard or respected. Then, after hearing the statement, you can choose to address it, postpone it, table it, or something else. But whatever you do, take back control of the meeting after that audience member has had his or her say. 3. Tell the truth about the question's impact. You will likely have an involuntary physical or emotional response to a hostile question. Your face might get red, you might get flustered, and maybe you'll lose your train of thought. You will also likely have an involuntary instinct to try to cover all of that up. That can quickly compound the problem and draw even more attention to it. You'll maintain your command of the room and of yourself if you simply say, I wasn't expecting that question. I need a moment to gather my thoughts so I can give you a considerate response. Then take that moment to think about what you want to say next, which might be, I realize I can't answer this right now, and I do want to answer you. Would you please stay after so we can discuss this in more detail? No matter how well you've polished your deck or practiced your delivery, you need to anticipate that at least one person in your audience isn't going to buy everything you're selling. But with preparation and a plan, you can make sure that the audience leaves the presentation remembering your confidence and credibility and not the comments of a hostile audience member. If you've ever spoken at a meeting or a conference, you're used to seeing people tapping away on their phones during a pitch, including in some cases the presenter herself. This has become so ubiquitous that we've come to ignore it as a signal that our listeners may be multitasking at best and totally checked out at worst. And it's not the only sign that we're losing our audience. Some other signs include backing away from the table, fidgeting or tapping fingers, no eye contact with you, nodding robotically, blank or confused facial expression, getting up and walking around, moving along, hand gestures, crossed arms. When we see these signs, we need to take the opportunity to stop talking, pause, check in with our listeners, and redirect the conversation. Here are 3 strategies. 1, stop talking and do a process check. In my experience, taking a significant pause can sometimes be enough to capture your listener's attention. It's a change from the ongoing sound of your voice, and if you haven't been pausing a lot, it can capture the ear and get your audience to look up at you. Adding a check-in can help redirect the conversation. You might say something like, I'm going to pause here for a moment. How is this going so far from your perspective? Or, let me stop here before moving forward. How are we doing on timing? Any question that takes the temperature of the audience should yield you some helpful feedback that will allow you to adjust your approach. 2, take the heat. You don't want to blame your listener for not paying attention, but you can blow the whistle on yourself softly. Say something like, one thing I know about myself is that I can get so excited about our offering that I can just talk about it nonstop. Or, I just remembered my manners. I've been talking for 20 minutes without giving you a turn. You don't have to beat yourself up, but you can call attention to your contribution to the dynamic and offer to remedy it. 3, ask for direct and immediate feedback. While few of us want to know that we're totally off track, most of us would rather know that when we still have the opportunity to get back on track. If you notice your listeners may be checking out, check in by saying something like, what would you like me to skip ahead to? I'm happy to focus on the areas that are most important to you. Your presentation isn't the most important part of your pitch. The people you're presenting to are. As cosmetics founder Mary Kay Ash once remarked, pretend that every single person you meet has a sign around his or her neck that says, make me feel important. Not only will you succeed in sales, you will succeed in life. It's happened to all of us. You're making a big presentation to an important client or participating in a high-stakes meeting with your boss, and suddenly you're asked a question that you aren't prepared to answer. Maybe it's because you haven't done your research, or you've done tons of research on everything except for that one specific topic. Maybe it's because you were up all night finalizing your deck instead of practicing for the Q&A, or maybe you truly know your stuff and you're just not at your best when asked to think on your feet. So what are you supposed to do? First of all, you have 3 immediate goals to meet when you're asked a question by somebody in the room during a meeting or a presentation. 1, make the questioner feel right for asking. This means you cannot respond with, hey, you just threw me under the bus, or why are you bringing that up, or that's a ridiculous question, as much as you might like to. 2, maintain your credibility and confidence. You may not know the answer to the question right this second, but you don't want to let a small setback undermine all of your hard work and overshadow everything you do know. 3, keep the agenda moving forward. As much as this moment may feel like the end of your presentation, or if you tend to catastrophize, the end of the world, it isn't. There's likely more work to do and additional objectives to achieve. Keep going. Second, even with those goals in mind, you're gonna need something to come out of your mouth in response. Ideally, it's something that sounds less like a gasp or a moan or a sob, and more like a polished, poised phrase that buys you some thinking time. Here are 5 ways to communicate that you're considering what to say while keeping your cool. 1, I don't know. I realize that I need some time to think about it or research it or find out. May I get back to you by end of day with an answer? 2, I'm happy to share my initial thinking, and I'd like to come back later with additional or different ideas. Will that work for you? 3, I haven't given this subject as much thought as I have other topics. I'm wondering if there's somebody else in the room who'd like to respond. 4, that's a thoughtful question, and it deserves a thoughtful response. I'd like to get back to you later after I've had time to consider it. 5, if I had to answer right this second, I would say, but with a little time to think about it, I might come to a different conclusion. While you might not always have the right answer immediately ready, you should be prepared to show that you know how to think on your feet. One of the primary reasons why people check out or multitask during online meetings or webinars is because they're not being asked to contribute their ideas or opinions. Here are 10 ways to shift from a one-sided lecture to an interactive session. Ask participants a question that they can answer over voice for a small meeting or chat for a larger meeting, such as, what do you anticipate will be our biggest challenge for Q4? Invite attendees to plan how they will apply what you've discussed, such as, what's the first thing you'll do after this meeting to share our new vacation policy with your direct reports? Give a quick pop quiz to test recall on earlier topics you've covered if your meeting is an hour or longer. Call on people by name. It helps them pay attention when they know that they can't hide. Create a poll to gather a visual snapshot of what your participants are doing, thinking, are challenged by, or even are celebrating. Ask people to fill in the blanks in the meeting notes you sent in advance so that they need to pay attention during the meeting to get the answers. Create breakout rooms so that people can work in pairs, triads, or small groups for a brief period of time and then return to the meeting and share their work. Play a video clip during the meeting. Give other meeting participants the opportunity to lead different sections of this session. Invite people to report back on something they tried or accomplished since the last meeting. If you're going to hold a meeting, whether in person, online, or a combination of both, make sure your participants have an opportunity not only to get something out of it, but to put something into it as well. As a professional speaker and facilitator for over 20 years, I've been introduced more than 1,000 times by countless meeting planners, conference organizers, and team leaders. Nevertheless, most of the introductions have fallen into one of 4 categories. 1, flattery. Deborah needs no introduction. 2, do it yourself. You can read Deborah's bio in the program book. 3, regurgitation. Let me read to you what's in Deborah's bio. 4, optimism. I've never met Deborah, but I'm sure she'll be great. While I pride myself on being able to establish credibility and rapport early in a presentation or a workshop, I also rely on the person introducing me to help set a positive tone, generate enthusiasm and interest, and make a clear case for why listening to me might be more beneficial than answering emails or taking a coffee break. In other words, a memorable introduction is like a commercial. It should engage and persuade the audience to listen to the speaker. Assuming you've got the basic speaker credentials covered, here are 3 additional goals to consider. Goal 1, to transition the audience from what they are doing or thinking about and to focus their attention on the speaker. Your audience members may be thinking about the previous speaker's remarks, be in the middle of a conversation with a colleague, or checking their social media. Your job is to get their attention to help them transition from their current mindset and activities to the speaker who is coming next. You might ask something like, how many of you wish you had more time for strategic thinking? Or have you ever wanted to throw away your to-do list? Questions, especially rhetorical ones, prime the listener to agree with the speaker, and we're more likely to listen to content we agree with. Or you might create some intrigue. Here's a paradox. Farmers are among those most likely to be negatively impacted by climate change and are also among those least likely to believe in it. Or excite the imagination. What if we could guarantee that the next generation of cloud computing would be 100% secure? Goal 2, to show the audience that you personally endorse the credibility of the speaker. You are often the bridge between the speaker and the audience. The audience knows and trusts you, but they don't know or trust the speaker yet. It's your job to build that connection during your introduction so that the audience is primed to listen. If you're the person this audience knows and likes, and you're saying yes to the speaker, then they're more likely to as well. You can say something like, of all of the experts whose books I have read on the topic of accountability, Dave struck me as having the most relatable, practical, and time-sensitive approach. I was so inspired by his 3 principles that I couldn't wait to invite him to share them with you. Goal 3, to create intrigue and excitement about what the speaker will deliver. To persuade your audience to listen to this speaker, you need to offer a promise of what the speaker will deliver and proof that he or she can deliver on that promise, like, Sam will give you 5 concrete strategies for you to stop losing talent to the competition, or Donna will share her secrets for how to maximize your retirement savings so that you can live the life you had always imagined. And then offer some concrete proof based on the speaker's experience, credentials, and track record to fortify your promise. A creative, insightful, and persuasive introduction can focus a distracted audience's attention, help build a bridge between the audience and the speaker, motivate the audience to listen with interest and excitement, create a positive environment that supports a successful event, and makes the introducer seem credible and confident too. Your presentation isn't just a collection of main points. It needs to connect and weave those points together in a logical flow of ideas. Transitions ease the listener into the next idea, provide internal structure, create suspense and intrigue, and serve to hold the whole speech together. Where do you need transitions? That was a transition in the form of a question, by the way. You need transitions between every section of your presentation so that your audience knows that the previous part has concluded and that a new section is coming. The better your transitions, the less work your listeners will have to do to keep track of what's happening. More importantly for the anxious presenter, when you carefully plan your transitions, the rest of your content will fall into place much more easily during the presentation. Most speakers don't forget their main points. They forget how they're getting to their main points. Mastering your transitions can help. That brings us to 20 transitional phrases for you to use. 1. First and foremost. 2. What else do we need to consider? Well, we need to consider. 3. The next point I'd like to address is. 4. Let's now take a look at. 5. That brings us to. 6. Also up for discussion is 7. All things considered. 8. Not only. 9. First, second, third. 10. Finally. 11. With this in mind. 12. What's more is that. 13. Similarly. 14. In contrast. 15. Compare that with 16. Moreover. 17. Surprisingly. 18. Turning to. 19. In the meantime. 20. In conclusion. In conclusion, transitions are what you need to knit your entire presentation together. Do any of these sound familiar? You've spent hours, days, weeks making sure that you have all of the data, facts, and statistics exactly right for your big presentation to the boss, and 2 minutes into your remarks, she says, "Let's skip to the end. What's the bottom line here?" Or you're in a meeting where your colleague is animatedly sharing his bold new approach for winning more business from clients, and you notice that one of your colleagues seems to be stone-faced. You're not sure what's bothering him, but something is. Or how about this one? Your cubicle mate asks, "How was your weekend?" on Monday mornings, and doesn't demonstrate any additional interest in you personally beyond that. Ever. What's up with that? Well, what's up with that is that every single one of us has our own pace, fast, moderate, or slow, and priority, focused on people and feelings and relationships, or focused on task and outcomes, and there are multiple combinations of how those show up in the people we work with. In order to be a more effective communicator, we need to recognize our own inclinations and the preferences of others. Furthermore, we need a wide range of styles on our teams in order to get the work done well. But for now, let's make it simple so that you can get started on adapting your communication style, including content and delivery, to the needs of your audience. Is your listener a what, a who, a how, or a why? What? Your listener may be a what if. They are focused on what needs to get done and on getting immediate results. They tend to make quick decisions and want others to do the same. They are direct, get to the point quickly, and want you to as well. If that's the case, make sure that your communications and presentations start with the main takeaway and what results you can expect in the short term, and then back it up with the details, but not too many. Who? Your listener may be a who if. They are focused on who is around the table and on how to generate enthusiasm. They tend to be talkative, sociable, persuasive, and friendly. They're more big picture than detail focused. If that's the case, make sure that your communications and presentations are personable, friendly, engaging, and share the big picture before delving into the details. How? Your listener may be a how if. They're focused on how decisions get made and how other people feel about those decisions. They prefer stable, harmonious work environments with minimal conflict, and they're known for their cooperative spirit. They perform in a consistent, predictable manner and prefer maintenance of the status quo. If that's the case, make sure that your communications and presentations include opportunities for your listener to safely express any concerns about how the process is going or will go, and reinforce key messages about your proposal being good for the team and the work environment. Also, make sure to address what won't change and where the status quo can be maintained. Why? Your listener may be a why if. They're focused on why actions are taken and decisions are made, and on taking the time needed to do things the right way. They are detail-oriented, precise, and analytical, and value quality and accuracy. They are reserved, diplomatic, and manage conflict indirectly or with subtlety. If that's the case, make sure that your communications and presentations are detailed, accurate, measured, and clearly make an evidence-based case for why this approach is the right one. And what if your audience is a mixed bunch of whats, whos, hows, and whys? Then focus first on the preferences of your key decision maker, and then make sure you have a variety of approaches in the rest of your presentation. Yes, that will be a lot of work. And when you get the final great job or sign off on your proposal, it will be worth it. Working with a difficult person, and often more than one, is as expected in the workplace as attending pointless meetings. We've all desperately tried to get a colleague to behave better, like the one who complains every time a change is announced, or who nitpicks at every detail in your presentation, or who completely withdraws when given direct feedback. These are the folks whom we try to work around, or avoid, or even pray that they find gainful employment in a different department, or even a different company. If you're like most people, none of your approaches to get the other person to change make a noticeable, permanent, positive difference in your day-to-day relationship. There are likely multiple factors that may be contributing to your ongoing frustration. And while some of those factors will be outside of your control, choosing your mindset about your difficult person is completely within your power. Here are 3 perspectives about working with difficult people that just might help you get unstuck. 1, you are likely your difficult person's difficult person. I have shared this view with thousands of leaders across industries in my workshop on navigating conflict and tricky conversations. Most of the participants have to hear this idea that your difficult person considers you difficult at least twice in order to process it. We're so used to thinking about the other person as the problem that we rarely think about our contribution to the dynamic. But think about it. If you're experiencing the other person as challenging, he or she is likely experiencing you as challenging too. Now, you may not be challenging to each other in the same way. You may be frustrated by your colleague's slow, painstaking, and methodical approach to projects, while she's bothered by your quick, intuitive way of executing tasks. Yet the bottom line is the same. You're both driving each other bananas. So take a step back from your indignation with your colleague and reflect on how you may not be such a terrific person to work with either. 2, your difficult person may not be able to behave the way you want her to. In her book, Make Difficult People Disappear: How to Deal with Stressful Behavior and Eliminate Conflict, Monica Wofford writes, conflict occurs when we demand and expect others to behave in a way that is not natural or known. While it might seem crystal clear to you that if your difficult person would just talk less, work faster, collaborate more, he or she would be the kind of person you'd be happy to work with. And while talking less, working faster, collaborating more might be behaviors that you can exhibit and that you value, that may not be the case for your difficult person. Wofford writes, those we work with who create conflict are often not being difficult, but are truly different in their approach. If you're expecting somebody to behave in a way that is not natural or known to them, you're in for an uphill battle. You may want to alter how you expect your colleague to behave, just like you would, right? And acknowledge, appreciate, and reward them for the value he or she brings to creating a necessary diversity of work styles. Stop saying difficult and start saying different. 3, you may not be able to fix things with your difficult person. You may want the relationship to feel more positive and productive, but sometimes that just isn't in the cards. According to Robert Sutton, author of Good Boss, Bad Boss, if the relationship truly isn't going to improve, you may need to practice the fine art of emotional detachment. That includes ignoring the behaviors that feel intolerable to you and choosing not to get emotionally triggered, which certainly takes some practice. It also means not judging yourself harshly for not being able to make every workplace relationship a great one. Accept that you can change your own mindsets and your own behaviors, but you cannot change another person, and you cannot fix a relationship all by yourself. As psychologist Carl Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Use what you've come to learn about dealing with difficult people to improve yourself and your future relationships, even if you can't improve this one. Have you ever had a conflict with a coworker? Of course you have. If your company employs more than one person, interpersonal conflict is inevitable. And you know what? That's a good thing. Disagreements can lead to a diversity of thinking, improvements in products and services, and greater productivity. Disagreements can also lead to better working relationships, but only if everyone involved fights fair. Here are 3 healthy conflict behaviors to look for in the person you're fair fighting with, so that you can say thank you when you see them. 1, telling you directly. In the words of Napoleon Bonaparte, The people to fear are not those who disagree with you, but those who disagree with you and are too cowardly to let you know. When a colleague tells you directly that they're frustrated with you, seeing a situation differently from you, or otherwise feeling disgruntled, consider it a gift. If you know, you can do something about it or make an informed decision not to do anything about it. But if you don't know, you're in the dark. Try saying this: "Thank you so much for telling me directly that you didn't like my decision, or felt disrespected by me in the meeting, or wished I had consulted with you. I appreciate you trusting me enough to share that feedback. Would you like to discuss it further?" 2, using a respectful tone. In the face of an interpersonal conflict, our brains register a threat in approximately 1/5 of a second. We immediately go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, and it's easy to become snippy, short-tempered, sarcastic, surly, or even go silent. It's reacting rather than considering how to respond. If your colleague is willing and able to stop his automatic reaction and demonstrate emotionally intelligent self-management by speaking to you calmly and with care, thank him. It likely took some work to be able to do that, and some respect for you to be willing to do that. Try saying this: "I just want to thank you for the calm tone of voice you're using right now, even though I know you're upset. It makes it easy for me to really hear your perspective and to have a productive conversation with you." 3, being curious. When you hear your colleague asking questions like, "Well, how do you see it?" Or, "What do you think I'm not understanding here?" Or, "What would you like to see happen?" Or even prompting you with, "Tell me more," thank her for being curious. Try saying this: "Thank you for asking me. I'd like to tell you how I see it, and then I'd like to learn more about how you see it." In the words of legendary radio host Bernard Meltzer, "If you have learned how to disagree without being disagreeable, then you have discovered the secret of getting along, whether it be business, family relations, or life itself." When you see your friend or colleague at work, you hopefully get a warm smile, a friendly hello, and maybe a little chat about your favorite TV show that was on last night. But at times, as soon as you see him, you know something's wrong. Maybe he just found out that he's going to be laid off during the upcoming merger, or his husband has cancer, or the massive contract his team was about to win went to his competitor. You want to say something helpful and supportive. Like what? Try one of these. 1, "I'm sorry this is happening to you." This is about expressing your awareness and compassion for the fact that your colleague is going through something upsetting. It's also morally neutral. It's happening to you rather than you brought this on yourself. 2, "What do you need right now, and what don't you need?" This is a way to communicate that you're willing to help. It's also a way to share that you don't know and can't assume what would qualify as help from her perspective. If you got laid off, you might want help updating your resume, but she might want somebody to make some professional introductions. Or she might want everybody to stop making so many professional introductions because she's just not ready. 3, "I wish I knew exactly what to say, but I don't, and I'm here for you anyway." I learned this one from my son Jacob. He can recognize when I'm in a funk, but he doesn't know exactly what to say when he sees it. Nevertheless, he is brave enough to approach me rather than ignore my mood and admit that he may not have the right words, but he is present with me. And just being there is better than just being eloquent. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel remarked, "Speech has power. Words do not fade. What starts out as a sound ends in a deed. So choose your words of healing wisely." We all know that at some point we need to have a tough conversation with our team members, our managers, our direct reports, and even our clients. And most of us would also do anything to find a way out. As Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen explain in their book, Difficult Conversations, this internal struggle is natural. If we try to avoid the problem, we'll feel taken advantage of. Our feelings will fester, and we'll rob the other person of the opportunity to improve things. But if we confront the problem, we may be rejected or attacked, we might hurt the other person in ways we didn't intend, and the relationship might suffer. In my role as an executive coach, I often help clients overcome their hesitation and anxiety so they're able to handle tough but important conversations in the right way. But sometimes in doing this work, we discover that their avoidance instincts are actually valid. Not every conversation needs to be had immediately, had by them, or had at all. How can you assess whether you're making a strategic choice to avoid a difficult conversation or just chickening out? Here are 11 questions designed to help you consider what to say, delay, or skip. 1. Based on what I know about this person and our relationship, what can I realistically hope to achieve by having the conversation? 2. What is my secret agenda or hidden hope for this conversation? Long-term harmony? Revenge? That they will change? 3. What concrete examples do I have to share of how this issue has shown up? 4. What's my contribution to this situation? 5. Do I tend to look for problems with this person or about this issue? 6. Is it already starting to resolve itself on its own? 7. How long ago did it arise? Is it a repeat or recurring problem? Could it become one? 8. How material is the issue to our relationship or to the job? 9. How committed am I to being right? 10. What reasonable, actionable solution can I offer? 11. Is this the right person to talk to about this issue? If your answers tell you that the situation is likely to resolve itself, that your concern isn't critical to the relationship or work product, that you're more committed to placing blame or being right than in really listening or seeking solutions, or that the appropriate time to address the problem has passed, then you probably shouldn't speak up. We've all worked with a difficult person, and for some of us, we're working with a whole bunch of them. For you, it could be the fierce individualist who doesn't seem to want to be a team player, or the boss who wears his stress all over his face, or the direct report who gives you one-word responses to your questions. But no matter what the behavior is that's tough or seemingly impossible to tolerate, we need to develop strategies that allow us to get the work done without blowing up, silently seething, or throwing in the towel. But before we talk to anyone else, we need to talk to ourselves. Here are 3 pep talks to give to yourself that will help you get into a mindset that will make dealing with a difficult person more productive, or at the very least, less destructive. Pep talk 1, don't take the bait. I will not be triggered. I have all of the resources I need to stay calm, be thoughtful, and not react when somebody else is acting out. If I take the bait, I become a part of the problem rather than part of the solution. I will remember to breathe, be mindful of my body language, listen for clarity rather than judgment, and ask for time to think about my responses. And I will keep reminding myself, I will not take the bait. Pep talk 2, be compassionate and curious. Just like me, this person wants to be happy. Just like me, this person wants to be safe. Just like me, this person wants to be respected. I'm curious about which of these needs or others aren't getting met. Or, I also know that as much as I can't stand her, she has family and friends who love her. What do they appreciate about her that I'm not seeing? Or, if I'm willing to believe that people come into our lives for a reason, maybe the reason she is in my life is to teach me something. What can I learn from this? Pep talk 3, Don't try to fix it, accept it. There are just some people I'm not going to get along with, and this is one of those people. Or, my time and energy aren't unlimited resources. I'm going to put them to better use than trying to go down the path of fixing someone. Accepting him for who he is, and that this relationship is what it is, frees me up to invest in other relationships that matter more and that have a greater likelihood of payoff. You won't be able to change the other person, but you can change your perspective and your approach for dealing with him or her. Nobody likes working with a bully. People who yell, interrupt, explode, or otherwise overstep their boundaries in hostile ways aren't just bad for your mood and morale, they're bad for your mind. Bullying behavior causes strong negative emotions, which, according to research from the Department of Biological and Clinical Psychology at Friedrich Schiller University in Germany, cause massive stress in the brain. When our brains are stressed, we make poor decisions, including reacting immediately rather than responding thoughtfully. This can make a bad situation worse by responding with anger, which escalates the problem, or deference, which gives the bully tacit permission to continue. A bully doesn't have to threaten you for you to feel threatened. A bully doesn't have to mock you personally for it to feel personal. A bully doesn't have to violate HR policies for you to feel violated. So how can you respond to someone who regularly ignores your needs in pursuit of his own? Calmly, cleanly, and consistently. Here are 7 approaches to try. 1, use the broken record technique. Try repeatedly saying, "You're interrupting me. You're interrupting me. You're interrupting me," until you break the flow of his tirade. 2, notice and name what she is doing using morally neutral language. "You have been speaking for 5 minutes" is less accusatory and judgmental than "you haven't shut up once in 5 minutes," or "you're not letting me talk." 3, try fogging to buy some time and distance. "You might be right," or "You've given me something to think about," or "I hadn't considered that," are all probably true, but you don't make him right or make you wrong. 4, express the impact that she's having on you. Say, "You're raising your voice, and that makes me feel unsafe or uncomfortable or angry." 5, make a direct request. "Please stop interrupting me." 6, separate the tone from the content. Get curious to see if there's any merit in the content that you can address positively, like, "I agree with several of your points, and I'd like to tell you what really resonates with me, but in order for me to do that, I need to be able to speak uninterrupted. Would you be willing to do that?" 7, go get some advice. Check in with somebody who doesn't experience this person the same way you do. This shouldn't become a gripe session, but a conversation where you can learn some new approaches and strategies you may not have considered. As actor and activist Michael J. Fox remarked, "One's dignity may be assaulted, vandalized, and cruelly mocked, but it can never be taken away unless it is surrendered." When dealing with a bully, you don't want to lose the battle or your dignity. Author and business leader Margaret Heffernan once remarked, "For good ideas and true innovation, you need human interaction, conflict, argument, debate." Nevertheless, many of us would rather not engage in conflict, argument, or debate, and maybe even avoid human interaction altogether. We work hard to minimize interpersonal tension, avoid disagreements, and even stay quiet in the face of differences of opinion or perspective. And yet, it happens. And sometimes when it happens big. When that occurs, you'll have some relationship repair to engage in if you want to prevent a similar scenario from repeating itself. Here are 3 things to do after you have a big blow up at work. 1, make a reparation. Offer a genuine apology for your tone of voice and the content of your message, especially if it may be perceived as aggressive, rude, defensive, critical, or condescending. I'm sorry for what I said and for how I said it. I got angry and I didn't control my temper. That's a simple version. Other language where you take full responsibility and communicate your regret work too. Keep in mind that an apology shouldn't be any version of, I'm sorry that you are an idiot, don't understand simple logic, made me lose my temper. Blaming the other person for your momentary inability to behave professionally is an unprofessional move. 2, express appreciation. Chances are there's something to be grateful for, even when you're feeling bad about what happened. You might say, thank you for staying and listening to me even when I raised my voice. Or, thank you for helping us have the conversation we needed to have, even if I didn't behave the way I wanted to. Or even, thank you for recognizing that I wasn't at my best and for suggesting we take a break and regroup. A little gratitude will go a long way. 3, offer an invitation. Just because the argument might be over doesn't mean that the relationship will immediately bounce back. And just because you may have moved past it doesn't mean that the other person has. Offer a genuine invitation to continue the discussion and hear their perspective, whether it's about the content or the impact that your behavior had. You could start by telling the other person how much you value your working relationship and then ask, what do you want me to know about how you're feeling? You might offer, what do I need to clean up with you in order for us to move forward? And you could say, you may not be ready to talk about what happened now, but I'm always open to discussing it with you. Will you please come talk to me when you're ready? In the words of author David Augsburger, the more we run from conflict, the more it masters us. The more we try to avoid it, the more it controls us. The less we fear conflict, the less it confuses us. The less we deny our differences, the less they divide us. When it comes to giving and receiving negative feedback, most of us would rather have root canal. In fact, many of us are so uncomfortable with negative feedback that we'd rather not even call it negative feedback. We'd prefer to describe it as developmental feedback, constructive feedback, corrective feedback, etc. And we don't just bristle against what we call it, we chafe against the feedback itself. Nevertheless, any professional who is committed to getting better at his or her current job and to career advancement down the road knows that negative feedback, when delivered appropriately, is critical to growth and improvement. Far too often, we fail to digest negative feedback because we're more committed to protecting ourselves and our egos against it. We'd rather be right than have something to learn. We'd rather catastrophize rather than put it in perspective. We'd rather make it about someone or something else than make it about ourselves. We'd rather shut down than listen. We'd rather say to ourselves about the feedback provider, what do you know, than admit that he or she might be offering up a perspective worth considering. Do any of these behaviors sound like you when receiving negative feedback? 1, dread. I make up the worst possible story about the feedback I'm about to get. 2, discount. I minimize the importance of the feedback. 3, direct. I change the topic to something else or make the feedback about someone else. 4, denial. I don't consider what could be true, even in a small way, about this feedback. 5, dissect. I argue about each element of the feedback rather than focusing on the whole message. 6, depart. I walk out of the conversation. 7, distract. I talk about other accomplishments to minimize the impact of the feedback. 8, defy. I reject the credibility or the authority of the person giving feedback. 9, defend. I make excuses or reject the content of the feedback. 10, distort. I turn small pieces of feedback into big deals and experience them as an attack on my character. 11, dramatize. I get highly emotional when receiving the feedback. 12, disengage. I shut down emotionally and stop listening. 13, dwell. I ruminate about the feedback. In order for negative feedback to have positive benefits for us, our colleagues, and our companies, we need to stop stopping the feedback from having an impact and start inviting it to teach us what we need to learn to grow personally and professionally. Here are 3 ways to do this. 1, recognize your default response and name it to yourself compassionately when it happens. If you're in the middle of getting some feedback and you start to think to yourself, that's it, I'm getting fired, say to yourself, oh look, I'm dramatizing again. Yep, that sounds like me. Don't criticize yourself for your reaction because that will trigger a secondary default response. Just notice it and name it and be gentle with yourself. 2, admit it and ask for a break. You might want to let the person who is giving you the feedback know what's going on for you. You could say something like, I'm noticing that as you're talking, my mind is going to some dark places about this feedback. I really want to be able to listen to you and my thoughts are racing. Can we take a break and come back to this in an hour? I'll be better prepared to participate then. 3, choose a more helpful mindset and make it a mantra. If you tend to think, I'm an idiot, replace it with, I'm always learning. If you tend to believe, this is the end for me, replace it with, this is a fresh start for me. If your head goes to, this guy is a jerk, replace it with, there's something to learn from everyone, even him. Receiving negative feedback can be hard, and it's also hard to get better at anything without it.